I'm 35 years old, and I thought I had finally figured life out. A stable career, a good apartment, friends who respected me. What I hadn't figured out, apparently, was women. Or maybe I just hadn't met her. She wasn't like the others. She didn't flirt with sweetness or hide behind a mask of shyness. The first time we spoke, she leaned across the cafe table, locked her eyes on mine, and said, "You look like the kind of man who gets bored easily. Let's see if I can keep you entertained." That one sentence was a trap, but I didn't know it then. At the beginning, she was intoxicating. Late-night drives blasting music, dinners that bled into mornings, conversations that felt like battles I didn't want to win. She challenged everything I said, mocked me when I was wrong, and laughed at me when I was right. She had this dangerous energy, the kind that made you want to chase her even when she was running straight toward fire. I fell for it. Hard. But very quickly, the shine wore off, and something sharper began to show. She criticized constantly, but never directly, always in the form of a joke. "Wow, that's the shirt you're wearing? You're brave. You really still hang out with those friends? You must enjoy losing brain cells. Your job? Cute. At least it pays rent." Each line said with a smile, like she was doing me a favor by keeping me grounded. She disappeared often. Sometimes for hours, sometimes for entire nights. If I asked where she'd been, she'd laugh. "Relax, detective. You're not my warden." If I pressed harder, her eyes would go cold, and she'd shoot back. Paranoia isn't attractive. Careful, people might start thinking you're unwell. And the cruelest part? The next day, she'd flip the switch. She'd kiss me softly, whisper things only I wanted to hear, look at me like I was the only man alive. It was poison and antidote, one after the other. But lately, she doesn't even bother to hide it. Her phone lights up on the table with names I've never heard. She comes home smelling of cologne that isn't mine. And when I look at her, she smirks and says, "Go on. Ask me. I know you want to." It's not just betrayal anymore. It's performance. She wants me to know, to react, to spiral. And as I lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling while she sleeps peacefully beside me, I realize something terrifying. With her, nothing is careless. Every slip, every stain, every whisper is deliberate. This isn't just cheating. This is a game. And I've already stepped onto her board. It didn't take long before the cracks in her stories began to show. At first, they were small, a slip of the tongue here, a detail that didn't match there, but once you notice one thread sticking out, you can't help but start pulling. One evening she told me she was meeting her old university friend, a woman named Oksana. She added the usual garnish of details, as if sprinkling seasoning on a lie to make it taste real. How Oksana had just broken up with her boyfriend, how she was heartbroken, how she needed a girls' night out. She even sighed dramatically, as if the responsibility of comforting a friend was weighing heavily on her shoulders. I nodded, pretending to believe her, and wished her a good night. But when she came back hours later, she didn't look like someone who had been drying a friend's tears. Her makeup was fresh, her perfume stronger than when she'd left, and there was a faint red mark on her neck she hadn't noticed in the mirror. The next morning, as she was sipping her coffee, I asked casually, "So how's Oksana holding up?" She didn't flinch, didn't even look up from her phone. "She'll be fine," she said flatly. But then she smiled and added, "Funny, you never cared about my friends before." I didn't respond. But inside I knew. Oksana wasn't real. Or if she was, she hadn't been there that night. The lies grew bolder. Another time, she said she was going to yoga. Something in her tone made me suspicious, so I drove past the studio. The parking lot was empty, the lights inside turned off. Still, when she came home, she tossed her mat onto the couch and said, "Exhausting class. I'm sore all over." Then she winked at me. She was daring me to challenge her. And when I didn't, when I forced myself to swallow the anger burning in my chest, she leaned closer and whispered in my ear, "Good boy." It wasn't affection. It was mockery. But the moment that burned itself into my memory happened the night she came home with flowers. Not the cheap supermarket kind, but expensive roses, wrapped in fine paper from a florist downtown. She set them on the table as if nothing was strange about it, humming to herself as she filled a vase with water. "Where did those come from?" I asked, my voice careful, steady. She didn't miss a beat. "Oh, my coworker bought too many for his girlfriend. These were extras." She smiled as she placed them in the vase. "Lucky me, right? Lucky." That word twisted inside me like a knife. Because I knew, no man spends money on roses just to give the leftovers away. But she wasn't trying to convince me. She wanted me to see through it. She wanted me to feel the insult. And when I stayed silent, she walked past me, brushed her fingers along my arm, and whispered, "You're not going to make a scene, are you? That would be insecure." That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her words echoing in my head. It wasn't just betrayal. It wasn't just lies. Every inconsistency was intentional. Every mistake was bait. She wanted me to react, to rage, to accuse, to look like the paranoid fool she was writing me into becoming. And for the first time, I understood. This wasn't random. This wasn't sloppy. It was a performance. And I was the audience. I told myself I wouldn't do it. I promised that no matter how twisted things became, I wouldn't turn into the man who snoops through his partner's phone at night like some pathetic detective. That's what she wanted me to become. Paranoid, broken, unstable. She'd laugh and say, "You're imagining things. You're losing it." I clung to that last shred of dignity, repeating, "Don't give her the satisfaction." But every lie, every smirk, every perfectly placed breadcrumb chipped away at me. The yoga class that didn't exist. The friend she met for dinner who never appeared in any of her photos. The expensive roses she claimed were leftovers. She wasn't hiding anything. She was parading it, dangling the truth in front of me like a lure. And no matter how much I told myself to resist, eventually I broke. It was 2 a.m. when I finally did it. She lay beside me, her breathing slow, deep, innocent, the kind of sleep only someone without guilt could manage. Her phone was on the nightstand, screen dark but pulsing like a heartbeat. I stared at it for almost half an hour before I reached out. Her passcode was her birthday reversed. I had seen her type it enough times. My fingers shook as I entered the digits, and suddenly, the glow of the screen lit the room like a confession. At first, I didn't know what I was looking for. My eyes darted across the apps, the icons, the digital facade of her life. But then I opened her messages. And there it was. Not one thread. Not one man. Dozens. Names I'd never heard. Numbers saved with emojis. Daniel. Pavel. Alex. Some with nothing more than a first initial and a heart beside it. My stomach dropped as I scrolled. One message hit me like a punch. "He's getting suspicious. But it's fun. He won't leave. He's too weak." And her reply, "Of course he won't. He needs me more than I need him. I think he likes the pain." My vision blurred. My hands trembled. Still, I kept scrolling. Photos. Not explicit, but damning enough. Selfies at bars, leaning close to men whose hands rested just out of frame. Pictures of wine glasses clinking, hotel lobbies, smiles that I hadn't seen directed at me in months. Always different men. Always the same performance. It wasn't just cheating. It was a pattern. A game. I should have thrown the phone across the room. I should have shaken her awake and demanded an explanation. But instead, I sat frozen in the dark, the blue glow of the screen reflecting off my shaking hands. There was no shock. Only confirmation. I had known all along. She hadn't been careless. She had been deliberate. I placed the phone back exactly as it was and lay down again, stiff as stone. My eyes traced the cracks in the ceiling while her body curled against mine in her sleep, warm and trusting, as if nothing was wrong. I felt sick. And then, around 3 in the morning, as if she could sense me awake, she stirred. Half asleep, her lips brushed my ear and she whispered, "You'll never leave me." "You can't." The words crawled under my skin like poison. Did she know I had looked? Or was it just another perfectly timed dagger, designed to pierce me in the dark? The next morning, she was her usual radiant self. Coffee brewing, hair perfect, humming some song under her breath. Not a trace of guilt. Not a flicker of shame. She kissed me lightly, asked about my day, and smiled as if she hadn't gutted me the night before. But I couldn't stop. The phone wasn't enough. I needed more. Proof carved in ink, not pixels. That evening, while she showered, I searched her desk. At first, it was receipts, bills, the usual clutter. But then I found it, a slim black notebook tucked in the back of a drawer. I flipped it open, and my stomach turned to ice. It wasn't a diary. It was a log. Page after page, notes about me. Dates, times, details. Confronted me about perfume. Denied. Reaction, frustrated but apologetic. Good. Mentioned Mila again. He hesitated, doubted himself. Perfect. Next step, Daniel. See if he cracks. My blood ran cold as I read line after line. Every suspicion I'd had, every little inconsistency, she hadn't just orchestrated it. She had measured it, documented it, like a scientist running an experiment. I wasn't her boyfriend. I wasn't even her victim. I was her subject. I shoved the notebook back into the drawer when I heard the water turn off. My pulse thundered in my ears as I sat back down on the couch, pretending to scroll my phone. She came out of the bathroom, her hair damp, her skin glowing with warmth. She scanned me instantly, like she always did, her eyes flicking over me for cracks. Then she smiled, poured herself wine, and sat across from me. "You look tired," she said. "Long day." I forced a smile. "Yeah, just work." She tilted her head, sipped slowly, and then whispered, "You know, sometimes I think you'd completely fall apart without me. And part of me wants to see it happen." Her eyes locked on mine, unblinking, waiting to see if I would flinch. And in that moment, I realized something terrifying. The phone, the photos, the notebook, they weren't accidents. They weren't slips. Every lie, every stain, every missing detail was intentional. She wasn't careless. She wasn't clumsy. She wanted me to find them. She wanted me to unravel. And I couldn't escape the question twisting in my head as I stared back at her. How far is she willing to take this before she decides the experiment is over? I couldn't take it anymore. The phone, the notebook, the whispers in the night, they played on a loop in my head until the walls of the apartment felt like they were closing in. For days, I walked around with her words echoing inside me. "You'll never leave me. You can't." It was more than arrogance. It was a threat. A prophecy. And maybe she was right. Maybe I couldn't leave, not while the questions chewed holes in my sanity. So I decided to confront her. Not in anger, not with shouting or accusations. I knew if I raised my voice, she'd twist it, frame me as unstable, dangerous. No, I had to do this carefully, coldly, in a way that would finally tear the mask away. I rehearsed what I'd say, over and over, until the words felt like stones in my mouth. That evening, she came home late again, smelling of perfume that wasn't hers and cologne that wasn't mine. She tossed her bag on the chair and gave me that look, the smirk that had haunted me for months. I was already sitting at the table, the black notebook resting in front of me. Her eyes flicked to it immediately. For the briefest second, I saw something new in her expression. Not fear, not shame, but recognition. She knew I had seen it. I tapped the cover with one finger and said, "We need to talk." She smiled, slow and deliberate, like a cat watching a bird that had just walked into the wrong cage. "About what?" "About this." I pushed the notebook toward her. "About the lies. The perfume. The messages. The games." My voice was steady, but my chest was pounding so hard I thought she could hear it. She tilted her head, her smile widening. "So, you've been snooping." "I've been surviving," I said. Her laughter filled the room. Not soft, not amused, loud, sharp, cruel. "Surviving? Oh, darling. If this is surviving, I'd hate to see what losing looks like." She leaned forward, her eyes glittering. "You think that little book is your victory? That it proves something? It proves you paranoid, obsessed, violating my privacy. Do you know how insane you sound?" I clenched my fists under the table. "It proves you've been studying me, manipulating me, writing down every reaction like I'm your experiment." She shrugged, took a slow sip of her wine, and set the glass down with a click. "And what if I was? Maybe I was bored. Maybe you make a better subject than a partner." Her words cut deeper than any knife. But worse than the words was the calm in her voice. She wasn't defending herself. She wasn't denying anything. She was admitting it openly, flaunting it, because she believed it didn't matter. "You don't understand, do you?" she continued, her voice almost pitying. "Even if you went to someone with all of this, the photos, the recordings, even that notebook, who do you think they'll believe? You? The shaky, desperate boyfriend with wild eyes? Or me? The composed, charming woman who's always smiling, always calm, who everyone adores?" She leaned across the table, so close I could smell the wine on her breath. "I don't need to prove I'm right. I just need to make you look wrong." For a moment, the room spun. She was right, she had rehearsed for this. Every possible move I could make, she had already written into her script. If I raged, I was unstable. If I begged, I was weak. If I said nothing, she would say I was sulking, childish. Every path led back to the same conclusion, her victory. But then something inside me snapped. Not in anger, but in clarity. I realized I had been playing her game on her board, with her rules. And no matter what I did, she had already prepared the ending. So I stood. Slowly, calmly. I picked up the notebook, tucked it under my arm, and looked her straight in the eye. "Maybe you're right," I said. "Maybe they'll believe you. But the thing about lies is, they have a way of rotting from the inside. And when they do, even the best masks crack." She smirked, but for the first time, I saw it, a flicker. A tremor at the corner of her mouth, a flash of doubt in her eyes. It lasted only a second, but it was there. I turned and walked toward the door. Behind me, her voice followed, sweet and poisonous. "You'll come back. You always do." I didn't answer. But the words echoed in my head all night. Lying awake in a cheap hotel room a few hours later, I stared at the ceiling and replayed the confrontation again and again. I should have felt proud, strong. But instead, all I felt was hollow. Because she was right about one thing, she still had the story. She still had the charm, the allies, the mask. And I realized then, the confrontation hadn't ended anything. It had only begun the next act. After that confrontation, after I walked out with her notebook under my arm, I understood something I should have known long ago. She had been ready for that moment from the start. Every smirk, every carefully crafted slip, every sharp little laugh had been rehearsed for the day I finally snapped and laid it all out. And in her script, I lost no matter what move I made. That night in the hotel, staring at the cracked ceiling, I realized if I kept playing her game on her stage, with her rules, I would always be the fool in her play. I needed a different script. A hidden one. I had to become what she never expected, someone she couldn't read. So the next morning, I came home. I smiled when I saw her. I let her kiss me on the cheek, let her pour me coffee as if nothing had happened. And when she searched my eyes for rage, for suspicion, for the cracks she always fed on, I gave her nothing. Just calm. Just silence. Just a mask. She thought she'd won. But behind that mask, I began building my game. I bought a cheap second phone. She didn't know about it. I used it only for one purpose: to record, to document, to back up everything she thought she had erased from the world. Every late-night call I overheard, every cruel line she whispered when she thought I was asleep, I captured them all. I photographed the roses, the scarf, the watch she forgot to hide. I took screenshots of her messages, every emoji heart, every accidental notification. I scanned the notebook page by page, careful not to disturb her writing. I stored it all in places she'd never reach: a hidden drive, an email account under a fake name, even a USB buried in my brother's garage. If she wanted a war of perception, I was preparing an arsenal of reality. And in the meantime, I played my part to perfection. When she came home late, I asked about her day with a gentle smile. When she dropped a new man's name into the conversation, I chuckled politely, as if it meant nothing. When she leaned close and whispered, "You don't even care anymore, do you?" I kissed her forehead and replied, "I trust you." The look in her eyes was priceless. Confusion. Frustration. She didn't know how to process my calm. Because my silence wasn't weakness anymore, it was strategy. But the more I withdrew from her script, the more reckless she became. One night she walked in with a bouquet of lilies, not roses this time, something more dramatic, fragrant enough to fill the whole apartment. She set them on the table and waited. "Beautiful, aren't they?" she said. "They are," I replied, smiling faintly. Her face darkened. "Don't you want to know who gave them to me?" "No," I said simply. "If it's important, you'll tell me." The silence that followed was thick, electric. She slammed the vase down so hard water spilled across the table. "You're pathetic," she hissed. "Do you hear me? Pathetic." I just nodded, wiped the water with a towel, and said, "Maybe." Her hands shook. For the first time, I saw the cracks not in me, but in her. That night, I overheard her again, pacing the kitchen with her phone pressed to her ear. Her voice was sharper now, less playful. "He doesn't react," she said bitterly. "I've tried everything. It's like he's not even there." A pause. Then quieter. "It's boring now." I closed my eyes and smiled in the dark. Because in those 3 words, "It's boring now," I heard it, she was losing control. She was addicted to my reactions, to the chaos, to the drama. And without them, she was starving. But I also knew starving animals are the most dangerous. She wouldn't just give up. She'd escalate. She'd find a way to drag me back into her script, to force me into the role she had written. And when that day came, I had to be ready. So I stayed quiet. I stayed calm. And in the shadows, I sharpened my knives of truth. The war wasn't over. It hadn't even truly begun. At first, I thought the silence would break her. I thought that if I refused to play, if I gave her nothing, no anger, no jealousy, not even a raised eyebrow, she'd eventually tire of the game. But what I forgot was that women like her don't just walk away when the game stops working. They change the rules. They double down. And when they feel control slipping through their fingers, they become dangerous. The signs came quickly. She no longer sprinkled her lies with charm or dressed them up as little accidents. She flaunted them. One night, she came home with her phone already lit up, a message from some man's number glowing bright on the screen, an entire string of hearts in the preview. She didn't even glance at it. She set the phone face up on the table, poured herself wine, and leaned back in her chair like a queen waiting for a subject to speak. "Strange," she said casually, "how you don't even ask anymore. Not curious." I smiled faintly and shook my head. "Not really." Her eyes narrowed. "That's not normal. A man who doesn't care is worse than a jealous man. Do you know that?" I sipped my drink and let the silence stretch until she shifted in her seat. For the first time, she seemed uncomfortable in her own performance. The provocations escalated. A man's scarf draped across the back of her chair. A stranger's lighter left in her coat pocket. Once, even a gold watch on the nightstand, deliberately placed where I couldn't miss it. She wanted the explosion. She wanted the scene. But every time, I stayed calm. "Nice scarf," I said one evening. "Bold color." She glared at me, waiting for more. When I offered nothing else, she stood abruptly, shoved the scarf into her bag, and muttered, "You're pathetic." Another time, I picked up the watch, turned it in my hand, and placed it gently back down. She was watching me like a hawk, her eyes bright with expectation. I simply smiled and asked, "Did you want me to set the alarm?" Her face twisted with rage. She grabbed the watch, threw it into her purse, and stormed into the kitchen, slamming cupboards until the apartment shook. But the moment I knew things were about to turn darker came on a Sunday morning. She sat across from me at breakfast, scrolling on her phone, her nails tapping the screen rhythmically. Without looking up, she said, "Do you know how easy it would be for me to make a call? Just one call. Say you've been unstable, say you've been raising your voice, maybe breaking things. Do you know who they'd believe?" I set my coffee cup down slowly. My chest burned, but I forced my voice steady. I imagined they'd believe the calm woman sitting at the table with a smile. She finally looked up, her eyes glittering with triumph. Exactly. It wasn't even a threat. It was a promise. That night, my prediction came true. A knock at the door. 2 officers stood there, polite but firm, asking routine questions. Was everything okay in the household? Had there been arguments? Raised voices? Did I ever feel out of control? I answered carefully, calmly, but I saw it in their faces. Doubt. Someone had already given them a version of the story. And I didn't need to guess who. When the door closed behind them, I turned and found her leaning against the wall, arms folded, her face serene, almost angelic. She tilted her head and smiled at me, slow and deliberate. Then she mouthed 2 words. "Your turn." Her smile was worse than any scream. That night, she didn't try to provoke me with roses or perfume. She didn't need to. She had already escalated beyond games. Now she was building a case, brick by brick, laying the foundation of a story where she was the victim and I was the monster. And for the first time, I realized this wasn't just about control anymore. It wasn't about her pleasure in watching me unravel. She was preparing to destroy me. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to her breathing beside me. Steady, calm, innocent, as if she hadn't just tried to flip my life upside down. And I thought about the evidence I had hidden, the recordings, the photos, the notes. I thought about how carefully I'd catalogued her lies. And I knew what I had to do. If she wanted war, I couldn't just defend myself. I had to strike first. For days after the police came, the apartment felt like a minefield. Every corner buzzed with tension, every silence was heavy, every glance between us carried a message I couldn't quite decode. She no longer bothered with scarves and roses. Those were the games of an actress trying to provoke applause. Now she had leveled up. She had dragged the law into it, planted seeds of suspicion outside our walls. And she walked around the flat like a queen surveying her conquered kingdom, sipping her wine with that same smirk, the smirk that said, "I own the story now." But she didn't know. She had underestimated me. I had been collecting. Quietly, patiently, meticulously. Every cruel whisper, every mocking laugh, every late-night phone call where she bragged about pushing me to the edge, I had it all. Her notebook, her messages, her voice, her face in photos she never wanted me to see. She thought I was just surviving. She didn't know I was building an arsenal. And I decided it was time to show her a glimpse of it. Not the full strike, not yet, but just enough to make her realize the balance was shifting. It was a Thursday night. She came home later than usual, her heels clicking across the floor like a drumbeat. She poured herself a drink before even acknowledging me. Then she leaned against the counter, sipping slowly, eyes fixed on me like a predator waiting for its prey to flinch. "Rough day?" she asked sweetly. I smiled faintly. "Not as rough as yours will be." Her eyebrows arched, amused. "Oh, and what does that mean?" I reached into the drawer beside me and pulled out an envelope. I didn't speak. I just placed it on the table and slid it across to her. She hesitated. Then, curious, she opened it. Inside were copies. Her notebook entries, photographed page by page. The transcript of her late-night call. "He's calmer now. Next week we'll have enough. I'll file, and it'll be clean." A handful of photos, her with other men, smiling in ways she hadn't smiled at me in years. Her face stayed still. Too still. No laugh. No smirk. Just the tiniest twitch at the corner of her mouth. Finally, she set the papers down and whispered, "So you've been keeping score." I leaned back in my chair, my voice calm, steady, colder than I had ever heard it. "No. I've been surviving. But now it's your turn." She tried to recover, of course. She laughed, brittle, forced. "This means nothing. Do you think anyone will care? You stalk me, you spy on me, you twist my words. That's all this proves. That you're paranoid. Obsessive." I pressed play on my phone. Her voice filled the room. Her laughter, her words. "He'll crack soon. I can't wait to see it." The sound echoed against the walls. For the first time in months, she looked rattled. Her wine glass trembled slightly in her hand before she set it down. "That," I said quietly, "isn't my voice. It isn't my handwriting. It isn't my fantasy. It's you. Your words. Your mask. And when the time comes, that's all I'll need." The silence stretched long and heavy. She stared at me across the table, her eyes burning, her breathing sharp and uneven. Then she leaned forward, her voice a hiss. "You won't dare use it." I stood slowly, picked up the envelope, and tucked it back into the drawer. "I already have. Copies are safe. Even if I vanished tomorrow, your mask would still fall." Her face twisted, and for once she had no line prepared. No witty retort, no cruel little laugh. Just silence. And that silence, her silence, was worth more than any victory I'd imagined. That night, she sat in the dark living room, sipping wine in silence. No music, no humming, no theatrics. Just staring out the window, her reflection fractured in the glass. I watched her from the hallway, and I realized she finally understood. The prey she had been studying had learned how to hunt. I went to bed calmly, almost peacefully, for the first time in months. Because I knew the war wasn't over, but the script had changed. She no longer owned the story. I did. After that night, when I slid the evidence across the table and watched her face stiffen for the first time, something in the apartment shifted. The balance was different now. She still smirked, still poured her wine with the same careless elegance, but there was a crack. I could feel it in the way she glanced at me when she thought I wasn't looking. I had peeled back her mask, even if only a little, and she knew it. But predators don't surrender when cornered. They bare their teeth. The next week felt like a storm gathering in silence. She stopped playing at subtlety altogether. She didn't just come home late, she flaunted it. She left the door open when she walked in, laughing loudly on the phone, her voice syrupy sweet with some man on the other end. She lingered in the hallway, making sure I heard every word. "I'll see you again soon. Tonight was perfect." Then she'd hang up, toss her coat on the chair, and look straight at me. No explanation. No excuses. Just challenge. And when I didn't rise to the bait, when I simply smiled faintly and returned to my book, I saw it again, that flicker in her eyes. Anger. Frustration. Fear disguised as disdain. But she escalated further. One evening, I came home to find her sitting at the table with papers spread out neatly in front of her. She looked up at me with a smile too wide, too polished. "You've been busy," she said. "So have I." She slid the papers toward me. Affidavits. Statements. Drafts of reports. All painting me as paranoid, unstable, controlling. She had taken the notebook she once used to document my reactions and rewritten it as evidence. In her version of the story, I was already the villain. "See," she said softly. "All it takes is one judge, one officer, and this becomes reality." I read the lines, my stomach burning. Twisted half-truths. Fabricated episodes. It was all there, ready to be used. She leaned back, sipped her wine, and smiled. "You think your little recordings will save you? No. They'll just prove how obsessed you are. People don't believe facts. They believe stories. And I'm better at telling them than you'll ever be." For a moment, I felt the ground tilt under me. She was right. Charisma and performance often mattered more than evidence. She had always won that way. But then I remembered the sound of her voice, echoing through my phone speaker. "He'll crack soon. I can't wait to see it." Her own words. Her own laughter. Her own mask slipping. I looked up at her and said calmly, "Stories rot from the inside when they're built on lies. And when yours cracks, the mask won't save you." Her smile wavered, just for a second. The following nights, the war became open. No more half measures. She called me names, loudly, viciously, trying to draw me into shouting matches. I refused. She stormed through rooms, slamming doors, throwing glasses, shattering plates, but I only cleaned up the shards in silence. She whispered threats when she passed me in the hallway. "Careful, they'll believe me, not you." I whispered back, "We'll see whose voice they believe." The apartment was a battlefield now. Two people circling each other, armed with folders and recordings instead of guns, but the tension was just as lethal. One night, she tried again to break me. She stood in the kitchen, her phone recording on the counter, half hidden behind a bottle of wine. She started screaming suddenly, words sharp and wild. "Stop yelling at me! You're scaring me." But I was silent. I picked up the phone, held it up, and pressed stop. Then I played back the audio, my calm breathing filling the room. Not a single raised word. Her face drained of color. "You're not the only one who can play games," I said quietly. For the first time, she had nothing to say. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat by the window, drinking, staring into the darkness outside. I lay in bed, watching her reflection in the glass. She looked smaller now, less like a queen and more like a cornered animal. But I knew better than to think it was over. Cornered animals are the most dangerous. She still had cards to play, and so did I. The war wasn't finished. It had only just begun. I knew sooner or later I'd have to stop simply surviving and start striking. Collecting her lies, her whispers, her staged provocations was one thing. But keeping them hidden forever meant nothing. At some point, the knife had to leave its sheath. The moment came faster than I expected. It was a Monday evening. She sat at the table with a fresh glass of wine, her phone propped up like a silent witness. Papers were spread across the wood, her fabricated reports, her twisted stories where I was the paranoid, unstable villain. She smiled as I walked in. Not warmly, never warmly, but with that cold satisfaction of someone who believed they'd already won. "Do you want to see what I've been working on?" she asked, sliding the stack toward me. "This is your future. Signed statements. Timelines. Testimonies. It's airtight." I picked up the pages, scanned the lines. Each word was a dagger carefully crafted from fragments of truth and buckets of lies. She had documented me as the aggressor, the obsessive, the dangerous one. And with her charm, with her mask, I knew she could make people believe it. I set the papers down gently. "Impressive," I said softly. "But you forgot one thing." Her eyebrows arched. "And what's that?" I reached into my bag and placed an envelope on the table. Thick, heavy. She froze as I slid it toward her. Slowly, she opened it. Inside were copies of everything she thought she controlled. The notebook, page by page, scanned, her own handwriting cataloging my reactions like an experiment. The transcripts of her late-night calls, where she bragged, "He'll crack soon. I can't wait to see it." Photos of her with other men, smiling in ways she hadn't smiled at me in years. And finally, a USB drive, labeled simply, her voice. She stared at the contents in silence. Then, for the first time, her hand trembled. "You've been keeping score," she whispered, her voice thin. I leaned back, steady, calm. "No. I've been surviving. But now it's my turn." She tried to laugh, to summon the old mockery, but it came out brittle, hollow. "Do you think this proves anything? People won't care about your creepy little folder. They'll see a man obsessed, paranoid, spying on his girlfriend. And they'll see me, calm, composed, believable. They'll believe me." I pressed play on my phone. Her own voice filled the room, echoing against the walls. "He's suspicious again. I'll push harder tomorrow. He'll crack soon. I can't wait to see it. The silence after it ended was suffocating. Her wine glass shook in her hand. She tried to smirk, but it didn't reach her eyes. That, I said quietly, isn't my paranoia. That's you. Your mask. Your cruelty. Your plan. And when the time comes, it won't be my words against yours. It'll be your words against yourself. Her face twisted. Rage flickered, then fear, then something I couldn't place. She stood abruptly, pacing, her movements sharp and uneven. You won't use it, she hissed. You don't have the guts. I stood too, collected the envelope, and tucked it back into my bag. I already have. There are copies. Even if I disappeared tomorrow, your mask would crumble. She stopped pacing, stared at me. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. For the first time since I'd known her, she had no line prepared. And that silence, her silence, was the loudest victory I'd ever heard. That night, she sat in the living room, staring out the window, the glass of wine untouched in her hand. I lay in bed, listening to the stillness of the apartment. The predator who once thrived on my reactions was now cornered, her own words turned against her. For the first time, I didn't feel like the subject of her experiment. For the first time, I felt like the one writing the conclusion. The silence that followed our last confrontation was unlike anything I had ever felt in that apartment. For months, it had been filled with her laughter, her staged sighs, her cruel whispers in the dark. Now it was heavy, sharp, like the quiet of a battlefield after the first gunfire, when both sides wait to see who will make the next move. She didn't speak much. She still went through the motions, pouring her wine, scrolling her phone, adjusting her hair in the mirror, but the energy had changed. She no longer looked at me with the confidence of a queen on her throne. Now she watched me the way a cornered animal studies a hunter, calculating whether to flee or to attack. I knew she wasn't finished. She couldn't just let it go. People like her never surrender. They escalate until the very last breath. 2 nights later, I came home to find her dressed immaculately, makeup flawless, phone propped on the counter recording. She started screaming the moment I stepped inside. Stop yelling at me. You're scaring me. But I hadn't said a word. I stood in the doorway, silent, watching her performance. Then I walked over, picked up her phone, and stopped the recording. I pressed play. The sound of my calm breathing filled the room. No raised voice. No words at all. Her face drained of color. You're not the only one who can play games, I said softly. For once, she had no reply. That was the moment I realized I had broken her script. Every line she had rehearsed, every trap she had laid, I had stepped around it. She wanted me to look paranoid, unstable, dangerous. Instead, she looked unhinged, desperate, exposed. The next morning, she tried a different tactic. She sat across from me at breakfast, sipping her coffee slowly. Do you really think this will save you? She asked. That little folder of yours? Those recordings? You'll look insane. I'll look calm. People will believe me. They always do. I met her gaze and smiled faintly. Not this time. I slid a small USB drive across the table. Copies, I said simply. Already with people who don't trust you. Even if I vanish tomorrow, the truth survives. She stared at the drive, her mask faltering again. For a moment, I saw something raw in her eyes. Not guilt, not remorse, but fear. Real fear. That evening, she packed a bag. Not dramatically, not with shouting or tears. Quietly, efficiently, folding her clothes with mechanical precision, slipping her jewelry into cases, placing her cosmetics in neat rows. I watched from the doorway, arms crossed. Leaving? I asked. She didn't look up. You ruined it, she said coldly. It was fun. You were fun. But now you're boring. I almost laughed. Even in her defeat, she tried to rewrite the story. Not that she lost, but that she chose to leave. She zipped the suitcase, rolled it to the door, and paused. Her hand lingered on the handle. Then she turned, gave me one last smile, sharp and poisonous. "You'll miss me," she whispered, "when the silence gets too loud." And then she was gone. For the first time in months, maybe years, the apartment was truly silent. No games. No laughter. No traps. Just quiet. I sat at the table, the same table where she had once spread her lies, where I had spread my evidence, where our war had played out in whispers and stares. I closed my eyes and listened to the silence. It didn't feel suffocating anymore. It felt like mine. The war was over. Not with a bang, not with a confession, not with a dramatic courtroom showdown. It ended with a suitcase rolling across the floor and a door clicking shut. And maybe that's the only way it could have ended. Because monsters don't vanish in flames. They wither when you stop feeding them. I had stopped feeding her. And she was gone.